Yeah, I'll react to that, sure. I'm ready. Are you ready? If you're not, there's the door. You're in the wrong class. If you are not ready to learn, that is. All right, this is the second series that was picked in the two polls over on Discord. I'm going to be on my third episode of the extra credits, extra history 1918 Spanish flu series, and now I am starting early Muslim expansion, Khalid Yarmouk al Qadisiyah. Yeah, it's almost 2 hours long, so I'm going to have to separate it into maybe like 5 or 6 videos. It depends on how it's kind of split up. I'll try and stop at convenient spots. Let's go. Original link to the video, top of the description below. Link to the Discord right below that. If you want to learn more about history, join the community, make it easier for me to interact with you, participate in polls, send me stupid stuff. That's fine. Would love to have you. Encouraged. Pull up a chair, my friend. More the merrier. Yeah, let's do it. Kings and Generals, great channel.
Almost 1,400 years ago, the ancient and prosperous lands of the Middle East were on the verge of a conflict of...
Before we start this, this is... I'm not just excited to learn about this because I know so little, but it also is going to tie in a lot to the... what happened around the Byzantine Empire. You know, when I think of the dark, when I think of, you know, connecting the end of the Roman of Rome, of the Roman Empire as a whole, when it separated into East and West, and then up to like the Renaissance area, a big gray area in my knowledge of history. The fog of war is plentiful in my head when it comes to those that area in history. And I've learned more about the Byzantine Empire, but I want to learn about what happens around it because that's a long time period, and this will help do that. All right, let's go.
3 empires and 3 religions, 2 of them fighting a constant, bloody and fruitless war for centuries.
Crusade?
One a newcomer looking to make its mark. The newcomer was the Rashidun Caliphate, and its arrival would change the history of the region and the world forever. The Roman state was almost constantly at war with the Iranian empires ever since the two entities touched borders in the 60s BC, as the Parthian Empire achieved a famous victory at Carrhae. The Roman Republic transitioned into the empire, and then this empire's western portion was lost to foreign invasions, leaving only the Eastern Roman Empire, while the Parthian Empire was replaced by the Sassanid Empire. But even then, these two states continued to fight.
So now down in the south, you know, Islam is going to be born, and I did watch one video on Muhammad.
In the 3rd century AD, another factor was introduced to these conflicts, the Ghassanids and the Lakhmids. These two Arab tribal confederations migrated from modern Yemen and became the vassal states of the Eastern Roman Empire and the Sassanids respectively. They participated in the Roman-Sassanid wars, often as scouts or raiders detached from the armies, or as light cavalry units within the armies, while also defending both empires from the Arab tribal raids from the south. The populations of these kingdoms worshipped traditional Arab paganism and Monophysite Christianity, and the latter created tensions with their suzerains, as the Sassanids were sure that any Christian influence may strengthen their Roman enemies, while the Romans adhered to Miaphysite Orthodox Christianity, which considered Monophysitism to be heretical. The Roman attempts to suppress Monophysitism caused the Ghassanids to rebel against them in the late 6th to early 7th century, and weakened Roman support in the...
I just want to say a question / statement. So Judaism is the oldest of Islam, Judaism, and Christianity, but it seems to be the only one that has never had a sort of kingdom. You know, like there's Muslim expansion, there's Christian expansion, but there doesn't seem to be any Jewish expansion. And is that because the population of people who practice Judaism just was never high enough for them to have their own sort of big conquering empire, or maybe something about the religion itself?
The area. On the other hand, religious tensions between the Lakhmids and the Sassanids were compounded by the attempts of Shah Khosrow II to control the region directly. In 602, he captured and executed the Lakhmid king Al-Numan III, turning the kingdom into a province administered by a governor. That forced the Lakhmid tribes to ask their Arab brethren to the south for help. Although the allied forces managed to defeat the Sassanid army at Dikar in 609, the Sassanids were able to keep the province under their rule. This sequence of events not only created divided loyalties among the Arab tribes in the region, but effectively stripped the Sassanid border of its traditional buffer. Despite that, the Sassanids were still very strong. In 602, they used the internal strife within the Eastern Roman Empire as a pretense to declare war. The Sassanids scored a number of impressive victories in the first years of the war, and although the Roman noble Heraclius took the throne in 611 and started to stabilize the situation, he wasn't able to slow down the enemy completely. By 621, the Sassanids controlled the South Caucasus, the Levant, Egypt, and most of Anatolia, which marked the largest extent of their territory.
So the Levant is, and I only know this because of, wasn't ISIS named something in the Levant? And so that's like modern day Iraq and parts of Syria and maybe a bit of Turkey and maybe a bit of Iran around that area?
Egypt and most of Anatolia, which marked the largest extent of their territory. Even though Emperor Heraclius was forced to fight against the Avars in Europe too, he was able to gain some momentum by winning 2 battles against the Sassanids between 622 and 625. According to some sources, Khosrow enlisted all men capable of fighting and turned the tide again. In 626, an army under Shahrbaraz besieged the capital of the empire, Constantinople, supported by the Avars and Sclaveni from Europe. The Roman Empire was on the brink of destruction, but the defenders of the capital persevered. This was the turning point in the war, as in 627, Heraclius entered an alliance with the leader of the Western Turkic Khaganate, Tongyabu, and together they invaded the Iranian heartland. Heraclius defeated the Sassanids at Nineveh in 627 and threatened the capital Ctesiphon in 628, which prompted the nobles to overthrow Khosrow. His son Kavad II became the next Shah and signed a peace treaty with Heraclius. The Sassanids paid a war indemnity, but otherwise the conflict achieved nothing, and the 2 exhausted empires returned to the pre-war borders. Meanwhile, to the south, the Arabian Peninsula was going through an upheaval. The population of this peninsula worshipped many religions, from the traditional Arab pagan beliefs to Zoroastrianism, Judaism, and Christianity. The Sassanids controlled the province of Mazun and the eastern portion of Yemen, while the deserts in the central and northern parts of the region were ruled by nomadic Bedouin Arabs. Their brethren resided in the rich merchant city-states in Hijaz. One of these city-states, called Mecca, was both a religious and economic center governed by the Quraysh tribe, trading mostly spices with Aksum, the Romans, and the Sassanids.
Guys, I'm wondering, I just got to say this before it distracts me. There have got to be some super, super old civilization or remnants around this part. Modern day, where the strait of, the southern Red Sea meets the Indian Ocean, where that little southwestern tip of the Arabian Peninsula and the Horn of Africa sort of meet. Or at least modern day Ethiopia or Eritrea, because obviously this is a huge traveling area the Sinai Peninsula, and so there must have been a lot of fighting and whatnot to maybe erase some really old civilizations. But I feel like there couldn't have been much fighting here, and there must have been people crossing over from Africa. I'm getting far off the point. I'm just wondering about super old civilizations over here. Sorry.
In 570, a boy called Muhammad was born in the Quraysh tribe. As a young man, Muhammad spent his time as a merchant, probably participating in and then leading trade caravans all over the region. As is often the case with traders, Muhammad would meet and converse with members of various religions on his travels. According to the later sources, he started receiving divine revelations sometime in 610. Soon this new prophet began spreading the message of a new religion, Islam, in his home city of Mecca. However, the Meccans didn't receive it well, and in 614 they started to persecute adherents of Islam. All this prompted Muhammad and his followers, the Muslims, to emigrate to Medina in 622. This started a war between the Muslims and Mecca, and by 629 the latter lost and was conquered.
I did see a video on that. I forget if it was Kings and Generals or not.
According to the early Muslim sources, at this point, sometime in 628, Muhammad sent envoys to the neighboring states, urging their leaders to join Islam and bow to the one God, Allah. The Sassanid Shah Khosrow II insulted the Muslim envoy, while the one sent to the Romans was killed in Ghassanid territory. This prompted an attack by a small Muslim army, which was defeated by the Ghassanids and Romans in September of 629 at Mu'tah. The same sources claim that Muhammad decided to lead a 30,000-strong army into the Byzantines' territory to retaliate, and took the city of Tabuk. However, most modern sources do not agree with this account of events. In any case, the conquests of Muhammad in Arabia continued. By 631, most of the Arabian Peninsula was under Muslim control. Muhammad passed away a year later. There are conflicting sources regarding the succession process, but one of the closest allies of Muhammad, Abu Bakr, became his successor with the title of Caliph.
Isn't this the origin of the big Sunni Shia? Isn't that the two ones? Sunni and Shiite. Anyways, the two Muslim factions. I think it's Sunni and Shia. Isn't this where the big separation begins? Like, one of them begins, this guy was the successor to Muhammad, or whatever you want to call it, and someone else believed, and the other sect of Islam believed someone else should have been, and that's the big where they differ.
He was the first of the Rashidun caliphs. In the meantime, Kavad II, who became the Sassanid Shah in February of 628, immediately started killing his brothers to secure the throne, which resulted in deepening disagreements between the Persian and Parthian nobles. Kavad died of plague in September, and although his 8-year-old son became the next Shah as Ardashir III, the empire was controlled by a member of the Parthian clique, the Vizier Ma'ad-Jushnas. This deeply concerned the Persian party, so it allied with Khosrow's general Shahrbaraz. The latter attacked and took the capital in April of 630, killing Ardashir and Ma'ad-Jushnas and becoming the Shah. The Sassanid realm was now in a state of civil war. Using all that, the governors of Yemen and Mazun declared their independence from Ctesiphon, which made them easy prey for the rising caliphate. Just 40 days after Shahrbaraz took the throne, he was killed, and the leader of the Parthian faction, Farrukh Hormizd, raised Khosrow's daughter Boran to the throne.
Anyone know how Muhammad died, by the way? Was it natural causes or something else?
This first queen in Sassanid history was overthrown by the son of Shahrbaraz, Shapur, a few months later. To stop the war between the factions, Farrukh offered a marriage between Shapur and another daughter of Khosrow, Azamidakht, but the latter refused, and the noble usurped the throne for himself in late 630. He would be killed by the supporters of Azarmidokht in 631, after which she took the throne for herself. Farrukh's son Rostam marched his troops to Ctesiphon to avenge his father, defeating Azarmidokht's armies along the way. After taking the capital, he restored Boran as the queen. The ruling alliance of Boran and Rostam managed to convince the leader of the Persian clique, Piruz, to stop the hostilities. However, after Rostam left the capital for the frontier, Firuzan killed Boran in June of 632. Rostam then marched for the capital again. According to some sources, the armies of both Firuzan and Rostam were tired of the bloodshed and forced their generals to reach an accord. One of the last members of the House of Sasan, the 8-year-old grandson of Khosrow II, was crowned as Yazdegerd III. Although the civil war was now over, the Sassanid realm was extremely vulnerable, as the Parthian clique basically controlled the northeastern portion of the empire, while Turkic raiders attacked from the Caucasus and Central Asia.
Funny how popular an eagle is and has been as kind of a representation of a country or an empire, or at least a major symbol within that country or empire. On their flag or standard, you always see or often you see an eagle.
At the same time, the first Caliph Abu Bakr sent a portion of his army under Usama ibn Zayd to raid the Ghassanids in June of 632, possibly checking if the Byzantine frontier was well defended. The death of Muhammad and the departure of his army made a big number of newly conquered Arab territories think that the Caliphate was fragile, and in July, all of the peninsula save for Hijaz rebelled against Abu Bakr in what was called the Ridda War, or the War of Apostasy, as many rebel groups were led by people who declared themselves prophets.
Really?
The situation—
You don't hear about that often. Like, for instance, Jesus saying he's the Son of God. Did he? Look, I'm not the biggest Christian historian. I don't know everything exactly, but clearly he believed he was the Son of God, and people believed him, and he got crucified. But crucifixion was a very common way of torture and execution back then, and I'm sure a lot of people said they were the Son of God, and no one believed them. And so it's nice to hear, learning about the history of Islam, how you would imagine a bunch of other people also saying, like, no, I know the true God, actually. I'm a prophet.
Was most dire around Medina, as the rebels threatened the second most important city of the new realm in late July. However, Abu Bakr swiftly marched to the area and defeated the rebels in early August. That gave enough time for the army, which was sent north and defeated a small Ghassanid army around Mu'tah, to return. Abu Bakr proved to be a talented commander. Instead of uniting his armies and marching on each of the rebel groups separately, which would have allowed the rebels to attack his rear with impunity, he divided his army into smaller groups, and these units attacked the enemies around the peninsula. This strategy worked to perfection, and by March of 633, the Caliph's rule over the—
Doesn't that go completely against Napoleon and his idea of separating your army?
To perfection, and by March of 633, the Caliph's
different circumstances call for different strategies. I get it.
Over the entire region was restored. It is difficult to assess how much the Caliphate lost in terms of manpower, but the sources underline that the generals and troops gained invaluable experience in this conflict. While the Ridda Wars were going on, the leader of the Arab Bani Bakr tribe, Muthanna bin Haritha, was raiding the Sassanid territories in southern Iraq. The Sassanid civil wars made this frontier subject to attacks, and Muthanna, who adopted Islam sometime in the 630s, informed Abu Bakr of this fact in early 633. The Caliph decided that it was a good time to take over Iraq, and one of his main generals during the Ridda Wars, Khalid ibn al-Walid, was ordered to invade the region. Khalid was able to recruit an army of 18,000 at his base at Yamama and left for Iraq in late March 633. A letter was sent to the Sassanid governor of Dast-Maisan, Hormazd, demanding his surrender. Hormazd obviously didn't, but sent a letter to the capital, asking Shah Yazdegerd III for reinforcements. This letter was probably
See, guys, look at these shields. See, we went from a more Roman style, I guess, with not that, I forget what that's called, the buckle or something, metal thing in the middle of a shield, but it's not the diamond kite shape. It's more of the Roman style, which I thought I would probably prefer, but it also has, I'm not sure if it's against, like, if it's held like this or held like this. You know what I mean? The shield. Who was I talking about? Nasser with this?
Reinforcements. This letter was probably a trick by Khalid, as Hormazd gathered his 20,000 and marched out of the capital of his governorship, Uballa, to defend the crucial road from Yamama near Kazima. Khalid, however, moved his troops through the desert and threatened Hufir. The Sassanid leader was informed of this and had to march towards Hufir via Uballa. According to the Muslim sources, that was exactly what Khalid was hoping would happen. Despite the civil wars, Sassanid armies were still stronger, as their armor and weaponry made them superior, and the only tangible advantage the Caliph's forces had was their mobility. Khalid was going to use this mobility to tire the Sassanid army. This would become one of the most important elements of the early Muslim expansion. Their mobility and aggression were forcing their foe to defend multiple cities and fortresses, as it was never clear where the Arabs would strike. By the time Hormazd reached Hufir, Khalid started marching to Kazima. He could have probably taken the city with ease, but didn't want to be besieged by the heavily armoured Sassanids, so his troops waited and rested to the south of Kazima, while Hormazd marched towards him. In the first days of April, the...
Hey guys, just a question real quick. Just see how the Tigris and the Euphrates connect into one river that goes into the Persian Gulf? So is this part of the river called the Tigris, or is it called the Euphrates? All right.
While Hormazd marched towards him. In the first days of April, the tired Sassanid forces approached. The engagement that would occur in the area is traditionally known as the Battle of the Chains, due to the description of the Sassanid forces in the Muslim sources.
Most battle YouTube channels I watch do the same thing, but I love how it goes from the map in the beginning of a video, like a bigger map, you know, more zoomed out, and it talks about more overall things, and as the episode goes on, it goes closer and closer, more detailed, and zoom in until you get to the battle scene like this.
According to them, the Sassanid infantrymen were chained to each other to create a cohesive line, or to prevent any retreat. However, this makes no sense tactically, as that would have made the infantry even less mobile, and each dead warrior would have burdened their companions. We also never see this description in to create a cohesive line. According to them, the Sassanid infantrymen were chained to each other to create a cohesive line, or to prevent any retreat. However, this makes no sense tactically, as that would have made the infantry even less mobile, and each dead warrior would have burdened their companions. We also never...
Did that happen? Because I almost refuse to believe that whoever ordered that would be that stupid. I feel like that's...
See this description in the numerous battles fought between the Romans and the... We also never see this description in the numerous battles fought between the Romans and the Sassanids.
I'm sorry, there's just no way that
Most
happened.
probably, this stems from an incorrect reading of the Persian word silsilah, which can be translated as a mountain chain, a bounding chain, or a single line of soldiers. So the word...
There's just no way anyone would be that stupid. You're unless you're so crazy that there's just no way. Even if the commander, you'd be wanting your soldiers to die as a way of punishment.
Chain might be a metaphor for the disciplined Sassanid infantry. In any case, Khalid wasn't going to allow Hormozd's troops to rest, and his preparations forced the Sassanids to form up directly to the west of Kazima at the end of the tiring march. Their formation was the traditional infantry center and cavalry wings. Meanwhile, Khalid's army was arranged in a similar manner, but for the time being stayed in the desert behind the hills dividing the two armies. This delay only added to the fatigue among the Sassanids, as they had to stay in formation in their full panoply under the sun. However, this waiting couldn't continue for long, as the Sassanids controlled the springs in the area.
I was about to say why. Okay.
So a few hours later, Khalid emerged on the hills and his troops stopped some distance away from.
How about this? Why not sit in your position where you know, yeah, your troops might not have water, but I'm going to get to the fact that they control the springs in a second, but they are out in broad daylight in the sun with no protection, and so are going to dehydrate and tire more quickly. And so why not just wait until you see them make a move for water and break formation and then go in and charge?
From those of Hormozd.
And however, you could say, well, then your guys will be too tired. Well, however tired your guys are, the enemy is going to be even more tired because they've been out in the sun.
The only surviving primary sources of this engagement belong to the Muslim historians, so we will present their view of this battle. As was customary for the region, and traditional for the Roman, Sassanid and Arab battles of the era, the battle started with a duel, as Hormozd
I love this. This happened in the when I learned about the Muhammad video of him going to Mecca, Medina, and that whole initial war before he died. And I love this idea.
Forward and called Khalid to fight him one-on-one. Apparently, Hormozd then dismounted and Khalid followed suit. As the two generals clashed and fought to a standstill, a few Sassanid skilled warriors attacked Khalid. Another Arab general, Kaka bin Amr, who will play a larger role in the future, saw this and also decided to join the fray, attacking Khalid's assailants. Kaka and Khalid were able to overcome the Sassanid fighters and killed Hormozd.
2v3?
The Arab generals returned to their lines and Khalid ordered his troops forward. The armies engaged each other. On the wings, the balance of forces didn't allow either side to gain the upper hand. While in the center, the Muslim infantry charged their counterparts a few times, clashing and falling back without dealing much damage. However, the Muslim troops were much more rested, as even the infantrymen had travelled to the battle mounted. The Sassanid footmen weren't able to rest after their march, and each charge tired them even more. During one of the charges, Khalid's center managed to crack the disciplined Sassanid line in a few places. The Sassanid army, which was left leaderless in the wake of the duel, panicked, and the commanders leading the wings, Qubaz and Anushjan, started retreating with their horsemen. Their Muslim cavalry counterparts didn't chase the enemy horsemen, and instead enveloped the Sassanid center.
Jeez.
Soon the battle was over. We don't have a clear source on the number of casualties, but it is probably fair to assume that half of the Sassanid army was lost, while Khalid's casualties were less than a few thousand.
I wasn't sure if the retreating cavalry commanders on the wings were doing that to avoid encirclement and trying help, or were just trying to flee, and it seems like they were just like, see ya, sorry.
Meanwhile, Shah Yazdegerd, who received Hormozd's letter in late March, decided to send an army under Karinz to reinforce his governor. The speed at which it happened suggests that only the forces around the capital were gathered. According to the sources, Karinz had somewhere between 15 and 25,000 men when he moved south and crossed the Tigris. He was apparently moving towards Uballa to help the governor, but after he crossed the small river named Makil, he encountered the rest of Hormozd's army led by Qubaz and Anushjan, some 10,000 troops. Karinz was told about the events of the Battle of the Chains. Simultaneously, a mobile force commanded by Muthanna appeared nearby, probably sent by Khalid to chase the remainder of the Sassanid force and scout ahead, while he was recruiting from the ranks of the Arab tribes in the area of Kazima and Hufeir.
Smart.
We don't know what Karinz was thinking at this point, but it is clear that the Sassanids understood that they were not dealing with a minor raid, and they faced a traditional Bedouin Arab army made up of light cavalry. Catching Muthanna's mobile force in the open field would be impossible, since the Shah's army was considerably slower, so Karinz didn't move to the strategically crucial Uballa to protect it, likely worried that Muthanna would be able to attack his flank and rear. The Sassanid general decided to sacrifice Uballa and keep his position along the river in order to prevent Khalid from crossing the Tigris, and also from marching westwards to the most important city of the region, Al-Hira. In the meantime, Khalid was informed by Muthanna that a new army was moving to the south. The Sassanid position left him no other way to advance. Using the whole army to take Uballa might have entrapped him, so only a small group was sent to take it, while Khalid went on and united with Muthanna. The battle that is now known as the Battle of the River took place in the 3rd week of April. The Sassanids had anywhere from 25 to 50,000 troops, depending on the sources, while Khalid commanded around 18,000, as he was able to reinforce his army by recruiting from the local Arab tribes. The sources for this battle are conflicted, so we will try to do our best to form a coherent narrative. Before the armies formed up in the morning, Khalid personally scouted the positions of Karinz's forces and was now sure that winning a set-piece battle was his only option to continue the campaign. He returned, and the armies started to get into formation, both having a similar structure with infantry in the center and cavalry on the wings. The Sassanid army was deeper, as its commander made no attempts to widen his front and outflank the enemy, probably relying on the superiority of his troops and the fact that his second rank would be fresh when the time came. The battle started with Karinz calling for a duel. According to the Sassanid sources, duels were a way for the commanders to prove to the troops that they were ready to fall for them.
Yeah, but what if you fall? Then you completely demoralize them.
So a personal combat between champions was a usual sight. Khalid wanted to answer the call, but one of the duelists who was near him galloped towards the Sassanid commander, and Khalid stayed back. In the ensuing duel, the Arab fighter was able to defeat his opponent.
What are you doing?
That demoralized the Sassanids, so
are you not entertained? Haha, come face me, Arab leader. That's alright. I'm gonna have one of my good warriors over here. Go get him. And the fact that he didn't retreat, maybe he didn't know that it was just an ordinary warrior, or at least not the commander. That was just...
Jan were probably forced to march forward and demand another duel to restore their morale. The Muslim wing commanders, Asim and Adi,
have, like the Arabs did, send out a soldier to go duel. Don't make it so now you have no commanders. If they...
galloped to them. Soon, the Sassanid commanders were dead, and Khalid ordered his entire army forward.
I would just be like, hey guys, join us now. You don't have command.
Despite the fact that the Sassanids lost all of their top commanders, initially this charge was fruitless, as the forces of the Caliphate failed to make any headway and were even pushed back. But this pushback made the Sassanid lines disorganized, as the units lost cohesion due to the lack of command. Khalid was able to exploit this.
So stupid. I get its tradition.
And his counterattack created even more holes in the enemy formation. The rear of the Sassanid army attempted to retreat, while the front was still fighting. However, left with no support, the front was soon massacred. Lightly equipped and fast Muslim troops were able to catch up to the fleeing Sassanids with ease, and the battle restarted along the river. The sources do not give a clear picture of what happened here, but most of the Sassanid losses occurred in that area, as some were killed, some drowned, and some were able to cross the river. By the end of the battle, the Shah's army lost anywhere from 15 to 30,000 troops, while Khalid's casualties were in the hundreds. After the victory at the Battle of the River, Khalid didn't cross into central Iraq, probably for a variety of reasons. Firstly, he needed to create a new administration in the region and start collecting taxes.
Control the mouth of the river.
Secondly, moving into the Sassanid Empire would have stretched his supply lines, and would have put him into territory with no Arab tribes.
And it's a good defense.
On top of that, Khalid liked to fight on the edges of deserts, which gave him the opportunity to outmaneuver his opponents when needed. The Caliphate's commander established a new authority in the province, with its inhabitants starting to pay the jizya tax. Simultaneously, scouts from the local tribes were sent to the west and north to discover if the Sassanids had more armies nearby. As the Persian road and postal system were probably among the best of their time, the Shah learned about another defeat shortly after, and while Khalid was making his preparations, Yazdegerd ordered the troops from the northern and eastern parts of the empire to march towards the capital, Ctesiphon. A direct attack on the region controlled by Khalid was difficult, as the Arabs now controlled the crossings. So when the First Army, commanded by Andarzaghar, arrived, it was sent towards the city of Walaja, the first strategic target on the road between Uballa and Al-Hira. It was expected that the Arabs would attack in this direction, so the remnants of the Sassanid forces which fought under Karins joined Andarzaghar, bringing his numbers to somewhere between 25 and 30,000 troops. This army took positions outside of Walaja sometime in May. The Second Army was led by one of the top commanders in the Sassanid army, Bahman, and it was supposed to reinforce Andarzaghar if the Muslims indeed decided to move to Al-Hira. For now, this force of 20,000 was to be stationed along the Euphrates, halfway between Uballa and Walaja.
Guys, I think this is a good place to stop for now. I'm 25 minutes in. I was kind of waiting for maybe a more obvious separation point, but I'm not finding one. I think this is a good place to stop. You know, he's down here, got the mouth of the Tigris and Euphrates River. All right. I'm loving this, learning a lot. Big connect. I really... I'm not saying the Hobbit movies are the greatest, but to give an example, I love the feeling that I get when I watch videos like this and learn about topics like this. It's like, you know, in the end of the Hobbit, and I could use a couple different movies. The end of the last movie in the Hobbit trilogy, even though the Hobbit is the smallest book and it was made into 3 movies. How Saruman is like, you know, leave Sauron to me, and everyone is like getting ready for the next film. I feel like I get the same sort of feeling with when I watch stuff like this, where I've learned about an adjacent empire, the Byzantine Empire, the Eastern Roman Empire, and I always wondered exactly what was going on in, you know, to their east, and as they were fighting with Gothic peoples and trying to take back what they could from the Western Roman Empire. I always wondered what was going on here. And so I feel like I'm getting that, like, other, you know, I'm the same time period, but I'm learning exactly what happened here, and that'll help connect the whole of the history of at least West and Mid-Asia, you know, after the Roman Empire fell. Does that make sense? I hope it does. Very gratifying, stimulating, awesome. All right, be back with another one soon. See you guys next time.